The crystal chandeliers glowed above the Ritz ballroom, pouring golden light across white linen and silver cutlery. The air hummed with violins, champagne flutes, and whispers of wealth. Then, it shattered. "This card is fake." The words ricocheted off marble walls, sharper than any string quartet. All eyes turned. A woman in a red gown, Billionaire's wife, face flushed with pride, stood pointing across the table. Her laughter cut the silence like glass breaking. Beside her, a gray-haired attendant in a tuxedo held a single blue card in his hand. His hesitation was visible. He didn't want to be part of this. Yet here he was, caught between duty and humiliation. At the center sat her target, a black woman in a simple white dress. No glittering necklace, no show of labels, just calm posture, hands folded in her lap. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. Her presence was quiet steel. The man in the bow tie, her billionaire host, narrowed his eyes at the card. "Are you sure you belong at this table?" he asked, voice low, but loud enough for every guest to hear. The red-gowned wife leaned forward, delight in her voice. "Look at her. Look at that dress. And she wants us to believe she's one of us? Please." A ripple spread across the room. Forks stilled. Wine glasses froze mid-air. Somewhere, a phone camera clicked alive. The CEO, though no one here knew she was, one did not answer. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was warning. The wife pushed further, voice sharp. "Escort her out. This isn't her place." The attendant, trembling slightly, looked down at the card again. His words faltered. It doesn't read. Maybe it's fake." Gasps. A whisper of laughter from one end of the table. The atmosphere thickened like smoke, heavy, choking, unspoken. But at the center, the woman's gaze remained steady. No outrage. No protest. Only stillness, the kind that unsettles more than anger. And in that stillness, the question hung over the room like thunder. Who really belonged here tonight? She hadn't come to the Ritz for spectacle. She came to test the room. Hours before, when her driver dropped her off at the circular entrance, she stepped out alone. No entourage, no jewelry to announce her worth, just a white dress that whispered simplicity and a calm stride across the carpeted hall. She knew how this would play out. She'd seen the script before. At 32, when she first walked into a hotel boardroom asking for a loan, the banker studied her hands before her business plan. "No rings, no pedigree," he muttered. At 39, a concierge once demanded a second ID, even as her name glowed on the penthouse reservation. And tonight, at 46, it was happening again. Same stage, different actors. She chose her seat deliberately, a table marked for strategic partners, though no one at that table realized she was the biggest one. Around her, men in black tuxedos discussed stock tips like weather. Women in red silk clinked glasses, trading gossip dressed as insight. To them, she was just an intruder, someone who had slipped past the velvet rope. But she wasn't here by accident. This gala was hosted under the Ritz name, but financed by her capital. Her company had poured billions into partnerships with luxury chains, Ritz included. Tonight's event was a showcase, a celebration of wealth, and, for her, a quiet audit of how that wealth treated the people who carried it in black skin. The irony stung. She could have come wrapped in diamonds, with bodyguards at each shoulder, and no one would have dared whisper. But respect bought through intimidation wasn't respect at all, so she stripped it away, choosing silence and plain elegance as her armor. The waiter had greeted her kindly at first, offering champagne, placing the card tray in front of her. But the moment the red-gowned wife leaned forward, suspicion became contagious. Eyes narrowed, smiles tightened. Every gesture around the table shifted into quiet exclusion. Still, she remained still. Each insult, each sideways glance, slid across her calm like rain on glass. She had learned long ago not to meet contempt with fury. Fury gave them proof. Calm gave them nothing. A guest across the room, a junior analyst barely out of grad school, noticed her posture. He whispered to his colleague, "She's not folding. That's different." The colleague shrugged, already recording the moment on her phone. The billionaire's wife kept pressing, and the murmurs swelled. Yet beneath the noise, the CEO's phone buzzed once in her clutch. A single message from her assistant. "System ready. Standing by." She didn't touch it. Not yet. Timing was everything. The violins resumed softly, as if the music itself wanted to paper over the unease. but the room was already changed. And so, as the laughter circled her like a net, she sat unshaken, because this night wasn't their test of her. It was her test of them. The table didn't return to normal, it couldn't. The waiter shifted from foot to foot, still holding her card between two fingers like it was contaminated. He glanced nervously at the red-gowned wife, searching for permission. She gave it with a sharp nod. "Check it again," she ordered, voice dripping with triumph. "Though we already know how this ends." The man hesitated, then slipped the card into a portable reader clipped to his belt. The machine beeped once, then froze. A flicker of red light. "There it is," the wife crowed. "Declined." "Yeah." It wasn't true. The reader had lost signal. The ballroom's thick marble walls often choked wireless connections. But no one cared about technicalities. They cared about the theater of disgrace. Gasps circled the table. Someone chuckled softly. Another leaned back in his chair, smirking as if to say he'd expected nothing less. The billionaire husband leaned toward his wife, but his voice carried. "We should keep these spaces secure. You never know who sneaks in." The CEO's jaw didn't move. Her gaze remained steady on the candle flame before her. From the far end, a woman in emerald silk leaned closer to her neighbor. "Is she even invited?" she whispered, loud enough to be heard. The whispers became bolder, slipping into open taunts. She probably borrowed the dress. Maybe she thought this was general admission. I knew something was off the moment she sat down. Each line was a dart, meant to pierce. None landed. The waiter looked again at the card reader, frowning. He knew the signal failed. He knew better. But the weight of the room was crushing, and so were the eyes of the red-gowned wife. "It's invalid," he muttered finally, setting the card on the table like it was counterfeit currency. The wife's smile widened. She raised her glass high, as though to toast her own cruelty. "Security!" she called, voice loud, echoing beyond the table. "Escort her out before this gets embarrassing." The irony was lost on her. The embarrassment was already hers, she just didn't know it yet. From the corner, a young staffer froze with her tray of champagne. Her hands trembled, two glasses clinked together. She wanted to speak, to intervene, but one look from the maitre d' pinned her in silence. At another table, a man in his 30s lifted his phone, angling the camera discreetly. The red recording light blinked against the ballroom's glow. He whispered to his companion, "This isn't right. Keep filming." "Ugh." The CEO remained still, her fingers gently folded over her lap. She had endured this rhythm before. Suspicion, accusation, expulsion. It was an old song sung in new voices. But she also knew songs can change in a single note. And this gala was about to shift key. She could have snapped back. She could have risen to her feet, shouted above the laughter, demanded respect. But that would have been their victory, proof that she didn't belong, proof that they'd rattled her. Instead, she stayed seated. Her back was straight, her eyes lowered only slightly to the single flame at the center of the table. The candle flickered, but she didn't. The red-gowned wife leaned closer, clearly irritated by the lack of reaction. "Nothing to say?" she taunted. "Of course not. That's what happens when the game is up." The CEO blinked once, slow and deliberate. Her lips parted not for an outburst, but for a whisper so measured it forced those around her to lean in. "I don't raise my voice for lies." The words landed softer than the violins, but sharper than any insult thrown her way. A few nearby guests froze, unsure whether they'd just heard defiance or surrender. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, still standing at her shoulder. He looked down at the card again, then at her calm profile, and swallowed hard. Something in him knew this wasn't the usual scam, but he said nothing. Fear silenced him more effectively than any command. Across the table, the billionaire husband smirked. "Classic con," he said, waving his hand like swatting a fly. "They sit quiet, waiting for sympathy. Doesn't work here." But the quiet wasn't weakness. It was weight. Every second she stayed silent, every heartbeat she refused to match their volume, the tension deepened. The room didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a trial. From the corner, the young staffer with the champagne glasses still trembled. She looked at the woman in white, then at the couple in red and black, and her face flushed with conflict. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Not yet. A man across the aisle muttered under his breath, "Why isn't she defending herself?" His companion whispered back, "Maybe she doesn't need to." The red-gowned wife slammed her glass down, the sound echoing louder than the orchestra. "This is pathetic. Throw her out now. Still, the CEO did not rise. She didn't even flinch. Inside her, a memory stirred Atlanta, 20 years earlier. A different ballroom, a different insult. She had spoken up then, demanded validation, and was escorted to the curb while her accuser laughed. That night, she vowed never again to play defense in a game rigged against her. So tonight, she sat still, letting their words stack higher, heavier, like bricks in a wall they were building around themselves. Every taunt, every accusation, they weren't burying her. They were burying their own credibility. The candle flame wavered in the draft of their anger. Her silence anchored it, and as the room swelled with noise, she remained the still point in the storm. Because silence, in her hands, was never surrender. It was strategy. The ballroom had grown restless. What began as a single accusation had swelled into a chorus of whispers, a background noise louder than the orchestra. Yet somewhere in that sea of judgment, other eyes began to focus. At a table near the back, a young analyst, barely 30, badge still clipped from his conference earlier, pulled out his phone. The red light blinked as the camera rolled. He leaned toward his colleague, murmuring, "People need to see this. It's not just dinner, it's a spectacle." His colleague, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice low but firm, nodded. "Keep filming. They'll say it didn't happen if we don't." Across the room, a guest in an emerald gown tapped her husband's arm. "Watch her," she whispered, gesturing at the woman in white. "She's not panicking." He frowned, glancing between the red-gowned wife and the silent figure at the center of the storm. "That's not fear," he muttered. "That's something else." Closer to the head table, the young staffer still held her tray, champagne glasses trembling with every heartbeat. Her training told her to remain invisible, a moving shadow in tailored black and polished shoes, but she couldn't look away. She saw the way the woman's shoulders stayed relaxed, the way her eyes didn't dart or plead. It reminded her of her grandmother, calm in church pews, calm in courtrooms, calm in the face of storms. Her knuckles whitened against the tray. She wanted to speak. She wanted to say, "Her name's on the guest list. I checked it this morning." But her supervisor's warning echoed in her ears. "Your staff. Stay quiet. Stay out." Silence had been drilled into her, but silence tonight felt like betrayal. At another table, a pair of travel bloggers, phones already mounted on sleek stabilizers, caught the exchange. One whispered into her mic, "We're at the Ritz Gala, and something ugly is happening in real time. Look at that." Her partner angled the camera, catching the billionaire's wife mid-smirk, the waiter shrinking under the pressure, the woman in white sitting still, framed like an accused queen. The feed went live. Comments began to trickle in. "This can't be real. Name and shame. Why is nobody stopping her?" Meanwhile, a guest near the string quartet raised his voice, unplanned but instinctive. "Excuse me, she hasn't even spoken. How is this fair?" Heads turned. His companion tugged his sleeve, whispering for him to sit down. But the words had already cracked the ballroom's veneer. The red-gowned wife turned sharply, glare like a blade. "Mind your business. This doesn't concern you." But it did. Everyone knew it. The line between witness and participant had begun to blur. The CEO, still seated, let her eyes drift across the room. She didn't speak, didn't gesture. But her gaze caught the young staffer's trembling hands, the analyst's glowing camera light, the man by the quartet who dared to raise his voice. And in each one, she saw the beginning of a shift. The storm wasn't hers alone anymore. It was being recorded. It was being whispered. It was being seen. The hum of the room thickened. What had started as scattered whispers was now a current, pulling others in. Phones were lifted higher, discreet no longer. The spectacle was unfolding, and the crowd had chosen to watch. That's when the maitre d' appeared, tall, stiff, draped in a black tailcoat that seemed to carry the weight of the Ritz itself. He cut across the floor like a judge entering a courtroom. The murmurs softened, replaced by the hush of anticipation. His polished shoes echoed against the marble. He stopped at the head table, eyes moving over the billionaire's wife with deference, then locking onto the woman in white with cold calculation. "What seems to be the issue?" His voice was polite on the surface, but every syllable was sharpened for discipline. The wife wasted no time. "She doesn't belong here," she said, her hand slicing the air like a verdict. "Her card was declined. She's a fraud, parading in our circle." The maitre d' nodded once, as if the testimony was enough. Then he looked down at the CEO, gaze steady, tone clipped. "Madam, this is a private gala. Guests are vetted. I must ask for further identification. He didn't say please. He didn't ask like she was a client. He demanded like she was already guilty. The waiter shifted nervously beside him. He knew the machine had failed, not the card. But fear silenced him. The CEO lifted her eyes, meeting the maitre d's stare with quiet composure. She didn't move to her purse. She didn't reach for anything. Across the room, a voice broke in, timid but clear. The young staffer, still clutching her tray, whispered, "Her name's on the guest list." The maitre d' cut her down with a glare. "That will be enough," he snapped. She froze, cheeks burning, retreating half a step as if she'd committed treason. The billionaire husband leaned back, smirk curling. "See? Even staff don't trust her." The red-gowned wife pressed harder. "Remove her. Now, before this becomes a scandal." The maitre d' didn't hesitate. He gestured sharply toward the security stationed near the ballroom doors. Two men in black suits straightened, hands brushing the radios at their waists. The air in the ballroom tightened, anticipation coiling. Guests leaned forward. Some were thrilled, others horrified, but no one looked away. The CEO remained motionless. Inside her, memory stirred again. New York, age 27, her first investor dinner. A maitre d', too, had asked for proof before allowing her into a dining room she had paid to reserve. She had protested, only to be escorted out while her investors waited inside. She had lost that deal. She had learned the cost of anger. So now, 2 decades later, she sat anchored, watching the same play repeat itself. But tonight, the ending would not be theirs to write. The maitre d' leaned closer, voice low, eyes sharp enough to cut. "One last chance. Show us proof, or leave." Oh, the words echoed louder than the violins, louder than the laughter that had sparked this all. And in that moment, the tension reached its breaking point. The stage was set. The storm was ready. The next move would belong to her. The ballroom froze in that fragile silence, the kind that always comes just before something breaks. The maitre d' straightened, his voice cutting the air. "Security." 2 guards began to move. Not in a rush, but with the slow certainty of men who thought they were cleaning a mess. Their polished shoes tapped across marble, a sound as steady as a clock ticking down. The red-gowned wife leaned back in satisfaction, swirling her wine. "Finally," she said, "this farce is over." One guard stopped at the CEO's side, looming like a shadow. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us," he said, hand brushing the earpiece at his jaw. Still, she didn't move. The maitre d' reached down to the table, snatching up the card that had been set aside. He held it between 2 fingers, raising it for the room to see, his lips curling. "This," he announced, "is counterfeit, and we do not tolerate deception at the Ritz." Gasps rippled through the room. Phones tilted higher, flashes catching the card in the spotlight of chandeliers. A guest whispered, "That's theft," but the maitre d' ignored it. With a practiced flourish, he dropped the card into a black leather pouch at his waist, snapping it shut like evidence in a crime scene. The guard's hand extended, not gently. His fingers brushed the CEO's arm. The sound that followed wasn't loud, but it carried. A collective gasp, dozens of throats catching at once. From the corner, the young staffer couldn't hold back anymore. "You can't put your hands on her," she blurted, voice cracking with both fear and courage. The maitre d' turned on her sharply. "One more word and you're finished." But her words had already broken the surface. Guests were shifting, murmuring. A man in the back raised his phone higher and said to the lens, "They're physically removing her after taking her card. This is happening live." The CEO finally moved just her head, turning slowly toward the hand gripping her arm. Her gaze was calm, but the silence around it was heavier than any protest. "Remove her," the wife barked, "before she embarrasses us further." The guard tightened his grip. And in that instant, memory bled into the present again. She was 16, in Charlotte, told to wait outside because this area is for guests only. Her Sunday dress had felt like rags under their gaze. She remembered the shame, the cold sidewalk, the door closing behind her. But shame no longer lived here. Tonight, power did. The crowd leaned in, phones ready, eyes wide. The tension had snapped from whispers to spectacle, from insult to contact. The moment of no return had arrived, and as the guard prepared to pull her from her chair, the entire ballroom felt the axis shift. The humiliation was complete. Or so they thought. The guard's hand lingered on her arm, heavy, expectant. Around them, the ballroom vibrated with tension, half outrage, half hunger for spectacle. Then she moved. Not to stand, not to shout, just one hand, sliding with unhurried grace toward the clutch, resting on the tablecloth. Her phone lit with a single tap. "Activate Ritz protocol," she said softly, calm, measured, as though she were ordering dessert, not dismantling the power in the room. On the other end of the line, her assistant's voice came crisp and immediate. "Confirmed, ma'am. System standing by." The words weren't loud, but they rippled through the air like a hidden chord struck in the middle of the symphony. Guests glanced at one another, confusion flashing in their eyes. The guard frowned, uncertain. His grip loosened slightly, instinctively responding to the confidence radiating from the woman he thought was powerless. The maitre d' scoffed. "Empty threats. She's bluffing." But his voice lacked conviction. From the corner, the young staffer caught the shift. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "She's not bluffing." Oh. The CEO's gaze remained steady, fixed not on the wife or the maitre d', but on the candlelight in front of her. "Timestamp this moment," she said into the phone. "Video, audio, guest list, everything." Her assistant's reply was immediate. "Logged and secured. Ready for escalation." The words were cold, clinical, undeniable. The kind of language that didn't belong to someone begging for entry, but to someone pulling levers behind walls no one else could see. The billionaire's wife let out a laugh too loud, trying to recapture control. Listen to her, talking like she owns the place. But the irony hung heavy, because some guests had begun to wonder if maybe, just maybe, that was exactly the case. A man near the back lowered his phone for a moment, turning to his companion. "Did you hear how she said that? Like she expects the whole building to answer." The companion nodded slowly. "What if it does?" The CEO lifted her chin at last, her eyes sweeping across the table, past the maitre d', past the guards, past the red-gowned wife. "You think humiliation is the end," she said quietly, her voice carrying farther than the orchestra. "It's only the prelude." The guard released her arm, confusion flickering in his eyes. He took half a step back, suddenly unsure if he was escorting out a guest or standing too close to someone who outranked him. The maitre d' stiffened, but a bead of sweat broke along his hairline. And the ballroom, once certain of its verdict, now held its breath. Because something had shifted. This was no longer their trial of her. This was her trial of them. The ballroom had grown heavy, silence pressing down harder than the chandeliers above. All eyes were fixed on her, this woman in white, who hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't broken. Then she rose, not in a rush, not dragged from her chair, but with the unhurried certainty of someone who owned the ground beneath her feet. The guard stepped back fully now, instinct overriding command. Her voice came steady, cutting through the charged air. "You called me a fraud in a hotel my company finances." The words hit like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Some guests blinked, confused. Others stiffened, realization dawning slow and sharp. The maitre d' tried to interject, his voice faltering. "That's absurd." But she raised her hand, silencing him without raising her volume. "For 20 years, I've built partnerships with luxury chains across this continent. I've written checks that keep these lights on, that fund these very galas. And tonight you tried to strip me of my place in a ballroom I helped pay for." Gasps broke like glass. A murmur surged across the tables, the kind of sound that can't be controlled once it begins. The red-gowned wife's smile cracked, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "She's lying. She has to be." But then the young staffer, her voice trembling but true, spoke up again. "Her name's on the guest list. Executive tier." Phones rose higher. The blogger's live stream count ticked upward, thousands of strangers now watching in real time. The CEO turned her gaze toward the billionaire couple, calm, unyielding. "Do you know what I own?" she asked softly. No one answered. The silence demanded she go on. "I own equity in every third property you've ever vacationed in. I hold the contracts that dictate which wines are poured in these glasses. I employ more people across this city than your hedge funds combined." Her words didn't roar. They landed like verdicts, each one heavier than the last. The billionaire husband's smirk evaporated. The maitre d's face drained of color. Even the guard's posture shifted, no longer looming, now retreating. The red-gowned wife shook her head, desperate. No, this can't be true." but her voice was drowned by a sudden swell of clapping. It started with a single guest, then another, until applause spread uneven but unstoppable across the room. Not everyone joined, but enough did to make the air shift. The woman in white stood at the center of it all, not smiling, not basking. Only steady, only sure. "You thought I was here to prove myself?" she said finally. "But I was here to watch who you would prove yourselves to be." And in that instant, every mask at the Ritz Gala slipped. The applause didn't stop. It swelled, uneven and raw, but enough to fracture the room's certainty. The chandeliers still glowed, the violin still played, but the atmosphere had shifted, no longer a stage for humiliation, but a reckoning. The maitre d' froze where he stood, his authority slipping like water through his fingers. The pouch at his waist, heavy with the card he had called counterfeit, now felt like contraband burning against his hip. Sweat pooled at his collar. He looked at the guards, but neither moved. Their eyes darted between the CEO and the crowd, unsure who commanded them now. The billionaire husband tried to recover, his voice louder than necessary. "She's exaggerating. Partnerships don't mean ownership." But even as he spoke, doubt cracked through his tone. He had built empires on contracts. He knew the weight of her words. The red-gowned wife trembled, though she masked it poorly behind a forced laugh. "You're all being fooled," she cried, turning to the crowd. "She's just—" But a guest cut her off. A man in a navy suit rose to his feet, phone still raised. "We've seen the list. Her name's there. Executive tier. Stop lying." Gasps rippled again. The wife's face drained of color, her earlier confidence collapsing into raw panic. Near the back, the bloggers whispered into their live feed, voices tight with awe. "This is unreal." The staff tried to throw her out, but she owns part of the chain. People need to see this. Comments on their screen scrolled faster than they could read. "Expose them. Fire them all." Queen energy. The young staffer, still clutching her tray, stood taller now. For the first time all evening, her voice didn't shake. "She belongs here. She always did." Her words carried further than expected, amplified by the silence that followed. The maitre d' turned to her, his mask of control crumbling. "You'll lose your job for this." But she didn't falter. "Better that than my dignity." Guests applauded again, louder this time, the sound reverberating like a verdict. The billionaire husband's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but found none. Too many phones, too many witnesses. The wife clutched his sleeve, whispering frantically, "Do something." But for once he had nothing. The guards, sensing the tide had turned, stepped back fully. One even lowered his radio, muttering under his breath, "We're not touching her again." The maitre d' tried to salvage authority, his voice brittle. "Please, let's return to decorum. This is a misunderstanding." But his words rang hollow. No one believed them anymore. The CEO remained standing, her stillness commanding more than any raised voice could. Around her, the people who had mocked, doubted, and accused now shrank into themselves, faces pale, hands fidgeting. Their certainty had rotted into fear. The reversal was complete. The accusers stood exposed. The accused stood untouchable. And every guest in that ballroom knew the humiliation they had orchestrated had turned back on them, sharper and heavier than they could bear. The applause died down, replaced by an expectant silence. Every guest leaned forward, as though the entire ballroom balanced on her next words. The CEO raised her phone again. Her voice was calm, but it carried like a bell. "Carla," she said. On the other end, her executive counsel answered instantly, her tone crisp, professional, prepared. "Yes, ma'am. We're live." The CEO's eyes swept the room once before, landing squarely on the maitre d'. "Effective immediately," she said, her words slicing clean through the air. "Terminate the contracts of all staff involved in tonight's incident. Lock them out of the Ritz system. Full audit. Flag for legal review." Carla didn't hesitate. "Confirmed. Processing." Within seconds, a chime echoed faintly from the maitre d's tablet at his podium. He looked down. The screen flashed red. Access revoked. His breath caught. He tapped again, desperate. But the system repeated the same verdict. The guards checked their radios. Dead. Their credentials had gone dark. The waiter's handheld reader froze, then blinked a message across its screen. Authorization revoked. His fingers trembled as he lowered it, realizing his role in the debacle had already been sealed in the system's memory. Gasps swept the tables. A woman near the back whispered, "She just shut them out, right here, in real time." The red-gowned wife staggered, clutching her husband's arm. "She can't do that. Tell me she can't do that." But the look in his eyes betrayed him. He knew she could. Worse, he knew she already had. The CEO lowered her phone, her gaze steady on the couple. "You wanted me gone," she said, each syllable precise. "Instead, you're gone from every contract, every ledger, every door you thought would open to you." Her assistant's voice came through again, clear enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Audit complete. Staff suspended. Notifications sent. Would you like me to inform the board?" "Yes," she replied softly. "Send it now." The room erupted in hushed chatter. Phones buzzed as alerts spread faster than wine could pour, news breaking live from inside the gala itself. The maitre d' slumped, his authority dissolved in real time. One guard shook his head, whispering, "It's over," before retreating toward the back. The CEO's eyes never left the table. "Humiliation has consequences," she said, voice low but devastating. "And so does dignity. Tonight you chose the first, I choose the second." The red-gowned wife tried to speak, but no sound came. The billionaire husband, pale and rigid, pulled her back into her chair. Their empire of confidence had crumbled in full view of the crowd. Guests raised their glasses now, not in mockery, but in recognition. Applause began again, louder this time, rolling across the ballroom like thunder. And at the center, she stood unwavering, justice delivered without shouting, without chaos, only clarity. The ballroom was no longer the same room. Minutes earlier, it had been a stage for ridicule. Now, it was a court of justice, and the verdict was final. The maitre d' stood hollow, his badge useless. The guards lingered at the edges, stripped of authority. The waiter stared at his own hands as though they no longer belonged to him. And at the head table, the billionaire's wife sat frozen, her crimson gown unable to shield her from the weight of humiliation she had orchestrated but could no longer contain. The CEO remained standing, calm as stone in the center of the storm she had turned inside out. She raised her glass not with a toast, but with resolve. Her voice was steady, deliberate, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. "I don't need cameras to prove what happened here. I don't need applause to make it matter. I am the result of every humiliation you thought would break me, and tonight, I am the consequence of yours." The room hushed, her words etched into the silence. She set the glass down gently, the soft sound louder than thunder in the charged air. Then she turned toward the crowd, her gaze sweeping across the phones, the stunned faces, the witnesses who would carry this night beyond these walls. "You mistook silence for weakness," she said. "But silence is power when you own the ground beneath it." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then applause surged again, not scattered this time, but unified, rolling like a wave through the ballroom. Guests rose to their feet, some cheering, some crying, some simply clapping in stunned respect. The young staffer stepped forward, placing her tray down on the nearest table. She bowed her head slightly, not as an employee, but as someone who had witnessed dignity outshine cruelty. The CEO nodded once in return, acknowledgement passing like a spark. Across the room, the bloggers whispered into their live stream. "This isn't just a story about wealth. It's about what dignity looks like when you refuse to bend." Their feed exploded with comments. "Chills. Justice served. This woman is everything." The billionaire husband slumped in his chair, staring at the tablecloth as though it might swallow him. His wife's painted smile had vanished entirely, replaced by the pale silence of someone who had finally realized she'd picked the wrong enemy. The CEO picked up her clutch, sliding her phone inside with the same ease she had begun the night with. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand apologies. She didn't need to. Her presence was verdict enough. She walked from the table, each step unhurried, each step echoing in the hush between bursts of applause. No one blocked her way. No one dared. The doors of the Ritz opened as though they were hers to command because, in truth, they were. And as she passed beneath the chandeliers, her words lingered in the air, carved into the memory of every witness. Justice doesn't need to scream, it only needs to stand. The applause followed her out, rolling like thunder through marble halls, a sound no one at the Ritz would forget. Because on that night, in that ballroom, she hadn't just defended her dignity, she redefined it.